Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our secure coding session. We're going to talk about field-level security, CRUD, and sharing. My name is Max Feldman. I'm a product security engineer. I work on doing security reviews of some of the App Exchange apps, and I also work on security reviews of internal platform stuff here at Salesforce.
My name is Kyle Tobiner. I'm also a product security engineer. I specialize in Force.com platform security. And you may also know me from developer support. I used to work on a lot of really tough cases. All right. So safe harbor. If we talk about anything forward-looking, which we are not, don't make any purchasing decisions on that. But we're not, so don't worry about that. So you don't need to take any photos of the slides. We are going to give you all the slides and actually all the demos too after the talk. About 20 minutes after the talk, we'll post them to the Dreamforce session page.
And also, if you have any questions during the presentation, please post them to that same thread. We've got some people here in the audience who will be answering the questions. We'll also have Q&A at the end, and we'll also have some trivia during this, and we'll hand out prizes. So if you do win a prize, please come up after the presentation.
So today we're talking about authorization for Force.com. Specifically, we're talking about FLS, CRUD, and sharing. This is primarily useful for Salesforce developers, but if you're like a prospective partner or an admin who just wants to know a little bit more about these features, this is good for you too. And if this is below your level, we've got some pretty hard trivia questions interspersed within. And if you get one right, you get one of these cool Salesforce Trust hoodies. These are pretty rare. I don't even have one, so the questions are hopefully hard enough to justify the hoodie. So what is authorization? Authorization dictates what a user is permitted to access. And we use the principle of least privilege to figure out who should be authorized. This basically says that a person should only have as much access as their duties require, and this minimizes accidental or purposeful use of excess privilege, abuse of excess privilege. And one thing we also want to mention, because we're going to use these a lot, user context and system context. User context tells you that your user's authorization is respected by the platform, and system context tells you that your user's authorization is ignored by the platform. And this is important for Apex and Visualforce because it allows them to be more extensible and flexible. But the reason for this talk, you need to be careful when doing it because you are opening up potential abuses of least privilege. So now Max is going to jump into CRUD.
So we're going to start this off by talking about CRUD in Salesforce. And so CRUD is create, read, update, delete. And these are controlled on the profile. And basically, CRUD dictates a user abilities object by object. And so as far as developers should be concerned, Apex classes do not enforce CRUD. Why is this? Because Apex runs in a system context. Visualforce pages, however, do enforce CRUD because Visualforce pages run in a user context. So to enforce CRUD in Apex, what you'll do is you'll take your S-object and you'll call S-object type and get describe, and then you can check if it is creatable, is accessible, is updatable, is deletable. So here we've got a sample controller class, which is getting an account, and what it's going to do is check if this account .objectType.getDescribe is accessible. If it's not accessible, it will return nothing. So this is just an example of how you would invoke these methods in Apex. So with that, we'll take it to a demo. So Kyle, if you could go to the browser. And what we've got here is our CRUD demo. And we have down here a little Visualforce page. And what this is going to do is act on a random sensitive object that we've created. So Kyle, if you could just select a user with no perms. And what this has, it's a Apex in the background doing CRUD operations. So what we're going to see here is that even though this user has no permissions, they can still create a record. And if you can create a couple more. And what's happening here is the Apex in the background is running in system context. So let's try and update them all and maybe delete them all. So we see here we've got this object that should be controlled, but Apex isn't doing this controlling. And so what we're going to show you is how you would fix that with code. So Kyle, if you could take us to the fix demo. And so what we'll do here is we'll edit our Apex class. And what we're going to do is invoke the methods that I just described, which is getting the object type and then checking if it is accessible. So what we're doing here is schema.subjecttype.randomsensitiveObject_1___c is creatable. So we're going to apply this, and then we'll see what happens when our user has their CRUD permissions checked by Apex, because we've finally written it right. So if you could select a user, again, that has no permissions. And what we'll see here when we try and create something is that we receive an error message. So we've done a check in Apex to see if this user should be able to create an object, and they're not able to. And this is the methodology you use to prevent access or creation, deletion, updating using Apex code. So if you could go back to the slides, and now we're going to do a little trivia question for all of you in the audience. So which of the following Visualforce code patterns respect the R read in CRUD? And we've got an Apex output field, we have Apex output text, we have a naked merge field, and then we have an Apex output text but with a dereferenced string. So select which ones of these actually respect the read permission. And just go ahead and raise your hand. Yeah. That is partially true. So there are actually more than one answer here, but you can come by after and we'll give you one of the, we've got some little prizes for getting it partially right. Yes?
1, 2, and 3.
Yes, that is correct. So stop by afterwards for a sweatshirt. So if we could go to the explanation of this, Visualforce respects the first 3, but this dereferenced string here on the bottom will not have a CRUD check done. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kyle for FLS.
Thanks. So FLS stands for Fieldlevel Security. It is also controlled on the profile, and you can see here you have we're looking at the account object, and we've got the fields there. Some of them are visible, some can be read-only. This dictates which fields are visible to a user on a given object. Your options: visible, read-only, and some fields, system fields like account name, created by, created date, those always come with CRUD. So you can't control FLS for those, but for most of the custom fields, you can. For developers, this is very similar to CRUD. Apex classes do not enforce FLS because they run in system context. Visualforce pages do enforce FLS because they run in user mode. The exception, much like the trivia question, is when you're using a dereferenced S-object, like contact email the string instead of contact.email the S-object field. So to enforce FLS, it's a very similar method to the previous where you're enforcing CRUD. You're calling the schema, you're getting the S-object type, putting in your S-object, in this demo it's account, then grabbing the fields set, then giving the name of the field, and then asking, is it accessible or is it updatable? So let's hop into a demo of this. Max is going to log out as our demo user. So what we have here again is a Visualforce page designed to demo FLS, and below we have blocks of code presented in the way that we just showed you in the trivia before. So we've got Apex output text, Apex output field, naked merge field, and then an output text with that dereferenced string or wrapper object. So Max, if you could give me a user that does not have FLS. Oh, you'll want the user with CRUD, but not FLS. So that's the behavior when you have nothing. All right, and what we should see here is that the first 3 blocks are respecting FLS for sensitive text and sensitive number. You can't see the values. But then in the bottom, for the output text pointing to the dereferenced string, the sensitive text and the sensitive number fields are shown up because FLS is not respected there. The platform cannot track it to that point. So we're going to show you how to fix this, how to check for FLS. So Max, if you could open up the demo. So this is basically the same page, except we just have the single block where FLS was not respected. And Max is going to jump into the edit screen. First, returning to the admin so we don't get an error.
Well,
Okay. So what you'll see here is the code block where we're assigning these two fields, sensitive object 1 and sensitive number 1, to the wrapper object strings sensitive text and sensitive number. And Max right now is adding the FLS checks to the assignment. So if the FLS check fails where it says is accessible, if that's false, it'll just assign an empty string. So Max, if you can save that and go back. You can see there now FLS is respected. And Max, if you can log out and go to the converse of this, a user who does have CRUD and FLS, we'd hope to see that the values will still be there. Perfect. So FLS is respected dynamically using the schema methods in Apex, which is exactly what we want. Least privilege here will be respected. The permissions that the admin have set up are respected. Everyone's happy. Now we're going to take it to, we have one more slide just to illustrate the point about the dereference string in case I lost you there. So here we have the Apex random sensitive object, and that's R. Then we have a wrapper object, which is just a plain object, not an S object, and that's WR. So when you assign R.sensitiveNumberC to WR sensitive number, you can see in the bottom the R.sensitiveNumberC will have its FLS respected, whereas the output text for WR sensitive number will not. FLS is ignored there. And that brings us to a trivia question. So here we showed you how to respect FLS in Apex. One of these, just one, is the correct way to respect FLS in Visualforce. We're using the rendered option. So we're calling object type custom object _ C for all of them, and that's where they start to differ. The first one is fields.customField.isAccessible. The next one is .customField.isAccessible with parentheses. The next one is field.customField.accessible, no parentheses, or is. And the final one is just custom field. So one of these is right. Gentleman right there on the aisle. The last one is not correct. Let's go over here. You there in the blue, yes, with the two fingers. The second one, no, also incorrect. How about way in the back corner? No. So you all got it wrong. Everyone fails. It's the third one. It's tricky. So anyone who got that wrong can come get a cup later, but no hoodies for you guys. All right, Max is going to take over doing sharing now.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about sharing. And what is sharing? It is record level access. It's controlled outside the profile via org defaults, roles, ownership, and sharing rules. And what sharing does is it dictates which records of an object a user can see. So as far as developers are concerned, Apex classes do not enforce sharing by default. Why is this? Once again, system context. Visualforce pages also do not enforce sharing. They rely on the controller for record access. So in this case, there is an exception. Standard controllers do enforce sharing, but this isn't as with CRUD and FLS where Visualforce pages are doing that enforcing for you automatically. And so to enforce sharing in Apex, you use the with sharing keywords. The default behavior is without sharing. So if you don't specify with sharing, it will default to without sharing. And invoked classes will respect defined sharing. So if no sharing is defined, a class or method will inherit sharing from its invoking parent. So here we've got a public class that we've declared with sharing. So you do public with sharing class, myController. And so in the context of this class, sharing will be applied up until we reach our inner class that's defined as without sharing. And so this class, myInnerClass, will not have sharing applied because we've explicitly defined that without sharing is its behavior. So now, Kyle, could you take us to the sharing demo? And what we're going to have here is a Visualforce page that's accessing some sensitive records. And what we'll see is that when sharing isn't enforced, our user has access to a lot of records which we don't want them to have access to. So user with CRUD and FLS will be good. But what we'll see is that if without sharing is the behavior, they can access everything. So we've got some records that the user should not have access to, and one record that the user owns that they should be able to access. So what we've got is a Visualforce page reflecting an Apex page that at its highest level has no sharing behavior defined. So we'll look at the behaviors of inner methods and classes and external methods and classes when no sharing is defined at the top level. So Kyle, if you could take us to the top. We see that an inner method you cannot define sharing for, so it will inherit the behavior of its invoking class. And the behavior at the top level was no sharing. So we see that this user has access to a bunch of records, many of which they shouldn't have access to. We also see an inner class that has no sharing defined inherits this same behavior. So the inner class has exposed all of these records to our user, which they shouldn't be able to see. If we have an inner class defined as without sharing, this behavior is the same. So instead of inheriting the without sharing behavior, it explicitly defines without sharing behavior, but that means the behavior is the same. So then, however, if we go down to an inner class that's defined as with sharing, this with sharing behavior will override the default behavior, and what we see here is this user only has access to the record to which they should have access. And now if we look at external classes and methods, we'll see that an external class or method that has no sharing defined also inherits the without sharing behavior that is the default and was at the top level. We see an external class or method that has without sharing defined exhibits the same behavior. We've got our user able to see all of these records, which they shouldn't be able to see. And then if we have an external class or method that has with sharing explicitly defined, this behavior will override that without sharing, and we've got our access restricted to the appropriate level. And what we're going to do now is open up that controller or that Apex page, and we're going to change our definition from no sharing mentioned at all to a class without sharing. So we're going to make this a blub. Oops. Here we go. Yeah, so we're going to make our class public without sharing class sharing demo. And then we'll do a quick save, and then what we'll show you is the behavior that happens now that we've defined our top-level class as without sharing. And what we're going to see is that the behavior is basically the same, because the default behavior of something that doesn't have with or without sharing defined is no sharing respected. So when we do without sharing, it'll be the same behavior. So we've got an inner method that inherits this no sharing behavior. We've got an inner class that has no sharing defined, and this will also inherit the behavior of its invoking parent, and an inner class that's defined without sharing. And we see here our user has access to all of these records, and that's not what we want. If we've got the inner class defined as with sharing, this is still restricted. With sharing overrides the invoking behavior. If we go to our external classes and methods, we see much of the same. We see that a class with no sharing defined or without sharing defined has this without sharing behavior. The user can access everything. But if we look at an external class or method that does have sharing defined, we see that it's been restricted properly. So now, Kyle, if we could go back and change the top-level class to be defined as with sharing, what we'll see is that this does affect the behavior of inheriting classes. So now we see that we have a top-level class that's defined as with sharing. We've got public with sharing class, demo class. And this inner method inherits that behavior. So an inner method called by a class that's defined as with sharing will exhibit the with sharing behavior. An inner class that has had no sharing defined, this is also, be careful to note, no sharing and without sharing are different for the purposes of Apex. So we've got this inner class that has no sharing defined, and up a little bit more, thanks. And we see that it inherits that with sharing behavior. If we look at an inner class that's defined as without sharing, this without sharing definition overrides that with sharing behavior, and the user has access to all of these records again. An inner class that's defined as with sharing has with sharing applied. And if we look at external classes and methods, if we don't define sharing, it will inherit with sharing behavior. If we define without sharing, it will override and display without sharing behavior. And if we do an external class or method with sharing defined, we have sharing behavior, and sharing is respected. So, Kyle, could you bring us back to the slides? We've got here just a little recap of that, a table to see what the behavior will be. I'm not going to walk through this right now, but it will be in the slides, which will be posted on the chatter feed. So if you ever need a cheat sheet for sharing and sharing behavior, just check this out. And what I do want to stress is that at Salesforce, we employ with sharing whenever possible. So our best practice for this, because CRUD and FLS, we saw that there are ways in code to fix these problems. For sharing, it's more of a best practice. And what we recommend is that you use with sharing whenever possible, and you really minimize and compartmentalize what you do without sharing. So what we have internally are classes that are all defined as with sharing, and if we ever need functionality that is without sharing, we will explicitly set that, but in an inner class or method, something that lets us keep track of where our without sharing behavior actually occurs, because then we can say, oh, sharing is respected throughout the code that we employ, except in these particular small cases. And this is the best practice we recommend for this, is to employ with sharing whenever possible and really limit your use of without sharing. And with that, we will go to trivia. So the code snippet below has a class which is defined as without sharing, and it queries the private account object, so the user shouldn't have access to this if sharing is respected. Assume the running user has no visibility to any account records. So when invoking this class via the developer console, does the running user see any accounts? And explain why for this one. So we'll want an explanation. But yeah, so we've got our class, query private. It lists the accounts, and we'll select from this list, but it's declared as without sharing. So what happens to this user? Yes? Okay, so the answer that she said was a user will be able to see this because without sharing will be applied. And so even if there's one account, they will still be able to see it. And that's actually not correct for this case, but you could swing by after for one of the smaller projects.
Can anyone tell us why that's incorrect? I'll give you a hoodie if you can.
Is it because the developer console is running the system level so they're going to see it regardless?
You were almost there, but you said the wrong word.
Yes?
Is it because of you're actually using system.debug?
No. So the gentleman here with the goatee was a lot closer, but he said system. The developer console is running in user context. But you were close enough. I'll give you a hoodie. That was good.
Yeah, so what we've got here is that sharing is actually respected because without sharing is ignored because developer console runs in user context. So that was a bit of a tricky question. So yeah, and I'll hand it back to Kyle for a recap.
So if you're new to sort of CRUD, FLS, and sharing, I like to use this spreadsheet model to illustrate what the features are to help keep track of them. You can think of CRUD as access to the different tabs representing the objects in Salesforce. FLS is the columns, the different fields you get to see. And then sharing is row-level access, which records in the spreadsheet show up for you. Now for developers, as we talked about, Apex does not respect CRUD. Visualforce with the standard controller does respect CRUD. You can use the object name, S-object type, getDescribe is accessible to enforce CRUD in Apex. And then for FLS, Visualforce respects FLS for S-objects, Apex does not. You can use schema.sobjecttype.accounts.fields, name of the field is accessible to enforce. And I think there's actually a code error in the CRUD one, reversed where the object should be. And then for sharing, by default, Apex does not enforce sharing. You have to use with sharing in the class definition to enforce sharing. And like Max said, at Salesforce, our best practice is all classes are with sharing, and then you make an inner class without sharing with a little comment block telling me why it's without sharing, so that when we audit the code looking for least privilege, we can easily see where it should be without sharing. Now, we have some additional resources here, and when you get the slides, you can just click on these links. They're the secure coding guidelines, which are on the DeveloperForce website. There's also the CRUD and FLS enforcement guide, which has neat little code snippets. You can also go to the Salesforce Stack Exchange and the security tag, or the developer forum with the security forum and the developer forums also. We try and monitor those and answer questions when they don't get answered, so that's a good place to ask if you need help. If you're a partner, you can also always go to security office hours if you need a little guidance on this. That link there will take you to the sign-up form. Max attends those a lot. You can also check out the security implementation guide. The link is there. If you want more general security guidance, things like IP range restrictions, identity confirmation, stuff like that. So I said you'd get the slides and demo. We will be putting the slides at that link there, which is also the sign-up page for this session. I'll also probably put them on my Twitter. And then if you want the demo code, and this is my favorite part about this, we made a trial template. So you go to that link there, you put in your name and your email, and then we'll send you a sign-up link to a pre-configured demo that is identical to the one you just used. You may have noticed there was tons of words on every demo. We put all that there so that when we're not there guiding you through it, you can take yourself through it and learn at your own pace. Feel like that's a good way to reinforce the concepts we went over. So please sign up. That'll also be the demos for our next talk as well, which we're about to advertise. So at 2 o'clock, Max and I are talking again about storing secrets, and the demos for that will be in the same trial sign-up. There's some other trust talks as well, building secure mobile apps with our friend Sergey, protecting your data against malicious scripts with our friend Xiao Run from Product Security, secure coding external app integration, which is with Asta, who's sitting right there in the front, and same thing with SSL, SOAP, and REST. She's also doing that talk.
And then a couple announcements. So if you are ever use our code scanner, the force.com code scanner now supports Salesforce 1 and JavaScript. So we've got a bit.ly link there, and this will you can just check it out when you check out the slides. We also have the Chimera Web App Scanner Alpha nominations, which are open to partners, so you can apply there. And we have live security office hours available in the partner zone, so I'll be over there later this week, and we've got some of our other team members over there to answer your questions. So if you've ever phoned in for security office hours, you can meet some of the people you've talked to, or people who review apps, or other people from product security over in the partner zone. And that'll be all week.
And that takes us to the Q&A.
Yeah, so if you have any questions or comments or want clarification, please, you can come up or use the mics in the middle, however you want to discuss. And if you got a prize, feel free to come up now, and we can hand those out to you.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, to which slide, sorry. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, so Kyle on Twitter is @KyleKyle.
Hi. Yeah.
Maybe this is stupid.
No stupid questions.
Okay. So in the Apex mode, it's running its system. You use the schema get describe, to do the check of accessibility. How does it know what user you're running?
So-
'cause you don't want to just, it has to be look at a specific profile.
So there's an Apex method. The system uses sort of this, but on the back
wanna
end, there's an
hop down?
Apex method called user.getInfo, and it can get all the active user info, and it checks that user's context. Yeah. So she was asking how the FLS and CRUD checks know which user context to use. And the answer is there's a method that checks who the running user is at all times, and that's what's referenced to get the user's context.
Questions you wanted?
You get a cup. You get a hoodie. Question.
Hoodie? What size? We've got, okay.
Price book
Large?
object is not affected by with
Yeah.
sharing.
Like your example shows in a class.
Is the price book object public by default, or can you change it to private? Because if it's always public, then sharing would just not have any effect.
Oh, so then,
It will still do the same effect.
yeah, so in that case, it would be more like an external class or method. So it's invoking something else. And so, but it'll be.
Let me give you my card, and I don't know off the top of my head, but I can look it up.
Or it'll inherit the behavior if there's no sharing defined explicitly. Yeah.
Right. So I was thinking that like
'Cause I don't have an answer for you. Sure.
Thinking of using
Hi.
without any declaration,
Yeah.
and then I can call it like from an external class. I can call it either with sharing or
Private
without
account,
sharing,
okay.
and it would just have different behavior.
Yeah.
based on what it calls.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have like a with sharing class that calls it, then it'll do with sharing. And if you have a without sharing class that calls it, it'll do without sharing. So if there's nothing defined, it depends on what it's being invoked by. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so the question is the example or
maybe.
the trivia we had where we referenced the developer console, and it was a class without sharing. So the developer console always runs in user context. So anything
We have
that
3
in the Apex side that would
do you
run
wanna
system
will that be
context
okay?
gets ignored.
Yeah.
I guess the exception to that would be if you kick off a scheduled job from the console, the resulting scheduled job does not run in or user context. That'll still run in system mode. But anything actively called from the developer console is user mode. Did you I think you get a cup though, if you'd like. You're welcome. Any other?
Yeah, so
The,
if it's
so there used to be, I don't think this exists anymore, but there used to be an API
but if
call
you're
where you
just
could
doing
run
something
Apex.
internal,
That
or-
was user
yeah,
context
and
as
so
well.
what a lot
So you
of
could
times
get
do
different
is,
results from that
for
because it was
the
user
product
context, and if you
security
called it.
for the
But if you
Apex
call an
security
Apex
reviews,
web
we'll let
service,
you,
that
like,
runs in
describe
system
false positives
context.
or like why a particular
Not in
use
user
case.
context.
So
It's
yeah. So, and then what you can do is if you can say like, well, so if you're trying to publish to the App Exchange, it'll
There's
be a
been
bit
some talk
different
about
'cause
that. I
you'll,
think they're trying to work
it will
out
need
how to
respect
make
sharing,
that
'cause
work.
You don't know like how other companies are doing it.
Yeah.
If you're just doing it internally, like it's important to think
Yeah.
critically about security and be. But if you say like, oh, it's
I
okay
suspect
because
there's an
only
idea
certain
on the
users have
idea
this
exchange.
anyway,
You could vote on it, but
it
I
can be
definitely
okay.
know they're
Yeah.
considering it.
So yeah, we'll fail
Yeah.
apps if they have like sharing errors, things like that, because other companies will use them. But if it's just for internal consumption, it'll be a bit different. Yeah, yeah. It depends because some like we try and approach security with a threat model that even users internally can try and like access data they shouldn't have access to.
Okay.
So that can be a concern too. If you've got like one type of user that can see a sensitive record, if you have an app that doesn't respect sharing, then maybe some other user, yeah. So it's possible
So
to
what
have
you
it
could
be
do,
okay without sharing.
you
but
saw
it's
when I
really
did the
important
is
to think,
so the
like,
question is
who's
about
gonna try and
criteria-based
get it.
sharing. How could you do criteria-based create? Is basically what you're asking?
Yes.
Right. So what you could do is if you wrote all of that in Visualforce and Apex, where we had the check
so
that was
if you-
like is creatable, you could just add another thing in there, and maybe I'm not sure how you would check
'Cause
which user
basic-
has
what you're
permissions
doing,
to
like,
what.
if you say
but you
that,
could certainly
any
come up with a way to
user
check
in
the
your org should be
criteria
able
of
to
what
see
they
stuff,
should have
then that's
access,
fine. Like,
access to
if you're
create.
okay with that,
Because the only solution we've come up with so far, and it's still in piloting, is to essentially query the metadata API, find out.
I see. So you want to do it dynamically. You want to get dynamic access to the criteria-based sharing rules.
So you can manage it.
Right. So the sharing rules don't really cover create. So you have to do the create checks on your own.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Would you be able to put the variable in a wrapper class?
Yes.
If you were to put the object in the wrapper class and reference that,
So if you were to do, if it was like input field and then you call WR, the wrapper, and then .account, .field, that should respect FLS. You open the demo, you could write that in like 20 seconds with the demo that's already there and try it out.